Thorfinn Roll stood outside Borgin and Burke's, watching his reflection waver in the shop's grimy window. 23 years old, wearing his father's best robes, now 2 decades out of fashion, and clutching an invitation he'd read so many times. The parchment had gone soft at the creases. Appointment, Tuesday, 8 o'clock. Discretion essential. No signature. No explanation of what the appointment concerned, though Thorfinn knew. Everyone in certain circles knew that Tom Riddle, some were beginning to call him something else, something darker, was building an organization, recruiting, offering opportunities to wizards whose family names still meant something, even if their vaults had gone empty. The Roll name had meant something once. His grandfather had sat on the Wizengamot. His father had owned 3 properties and a modest import business. Then came the bad investments, the worse marriages, the steady erosion of respectability that left Thorfinn with a Hogwarts education, a Slytherin tie, and precisely 47 galleons to his name. He pushed open the door. The bell's chime sounded like a warning. "Back room," Borgin said, without looking up from his ledger. "Someone's expecting you." Thorfinn moved through the cluttered shop, past cursed jewelry and shrunken heads, toward a door he'd never noticed before. It opened at his touch. The room beyond was surprisingly ordinary. A table, 4 chairs, walls lined with ledgers that might have belonged to any business. 2 oil lamps provided the only light. Tom Riddle sat at the table's head. Thorfinn had seen him before, years ago at a pure blood gathering, but the memory didn't match the man before him now. Riddle had been handsome then, striking in a cold way. Now there was something harder in his face, something that made Thorfinn want to look away even as he forced himself to meet those dark eyes. "Mr. Roll," Riddle gestured to a chair. "You're punctual. Please sit." Another wizard already occupied one of the chairs, Travers, if Thorfinn remembered correctly. Younger than Thorfinn, maybe 20, with the eager brightness of someone convinced his moment had finally arrived. "I appreciate you both coming." Riddle's voice was pleasant, almost warm. "I'm building something important, something that requires wizards of quality, of proper breeding and capability. You've both been recommended by associates whose judgment I trust." Travers leaned forward slightly. Thorfinn kept his posture carefully neutral. "The ministry has grown weak," Riddle continued, "soft on half-breeds, accommodating toward muggles, increasingly hostile to traditional wizarding values. There are those of us who believe a correction is necessary, who believe that magical Britain's true strength lies in embracing what we are, without apology or compromise. Nothing controversial yet. Thorfinn had heard similar speeches at 6 pure-blood gatherings. The difference was that Riddle spoke with certainty rather than nostalgic complaint. "This requires organization," Riddle said. "Structure. A group of wizards willing to act rather than simply lament. I'm not interested in social clubs or political committees. I'm building something more committed." "What would you need from us?" Travers asked. His eagerness was palpable. "Loyalty," Riddle said simply. "Capability, discretion. In return, I offer purpose, protection, and advancement within a hierarchy that rewards merit rather than ministry favoritism." He paused. "And I offer the satisfaction of being part of something greater than yourself, of mattering." The last word hung in the air. Thorfinn felt it land in his chest like a physical thing. When had he last felt like he mattered? When had anyone looked at him and seen potential rather than decline? Of course, Riddle continued. Commitment requires demonstration. Words are easy. Any wizard can claim loyalty. I need to understand who you are, what you value, what you're willing to do. Anything, Travers said immediately. Whatever's needed. Riddle's smile didn't reach his eyes. Admirable enthusiasm. He turned to Thorfinn. And you, Mr. Roll? I'd need to understand what I'm committing to, Thorfinn said carefully. Specifically. A reasonable question. Riddle steepled his fingers. Let me be direct. The ministry is monitoring certain families, making lists. Your name is on one such list, Mr. Roll. So is yours, Mr. Travers. Nothing actionable yet, but the trajectory is clear. Association with the wrong people, attendance at the wrong gatherings. These things accumulate. Thorfinn's stomach tightened. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was different. I'm offering protection, Riddle said. An organization strong enough that the ministry will think twice before moving against any member. But protection requires mutual commitment. If I invest in you, I need assurance that you'll invest in our shared goals. How do we demonstrate that? Thorfinn asked. Information, Riddle said. Trust is built on transparency. I need to know that you understand how this works, that loyalty to our group supersedes other allegiances. He slid 2 pieces of parchment across the table, one to each of them. Thorfinn looked down at his. 3 names were written there in elegant script. Selwyn, Macmillan, Greengrass, families he knew. The Greengrasses had hosted him twice last year, when his own lodgings had become temporarily unavailable. Adelaide Greengrass had been kind to him, asked no questions, treated him with the dignity his own relatives had stopped offering. These families maintain public neutrality, Riddle said. But I have reason to believe they're quietly supporting ministry initiatives that threaten our interests. I need to know what they're doing, who they're meeting with, what resources they're committing. You've both had recent contact with them. Travers was already nodding. The Selwyns held a gathering last month. I heard Marcus Selwyn talking with someone from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement about... Write it down, Riddle interrupted gently. Details matter. Names, dates, everything you remember. Travers pulled out his wand, conjured a quill, and began writing with quick, eager strokes. Riddle turned to Thorfinn. The Greengrasses sheltered you for a time, I understand. They were generous, Thorfinn said carefully. I'm sure they were. Riddle's tone remained pleasant. Adelaide Greengrass has always presented herself as above politics, but her husband has been meeting regularly with auras. I'd like to know what they discuss. Thorfinn looked at the parchment. His quill sat unused beside it. Is there a problem? Riddle asked. I don't know what they discuss, Thorfinn said. I was a guest, not part of their inner circle. But you were present in their home. You heard conversations, observed patterns. Where did Edmund Greengrass go when he left the house? Who sent owls? What names were mentioned? Everything Riddle said was reasonable. These were simple observations, not betrayals. And if the Greengrasses were truly working against traditional wizarding interests, didn't Thorfinn have an obligation to his own class, his own future, to speak honestly? But he remembered Adelaide's kindness, the way she'd pretended his presence was a favor to her rather than charity to him, the extra blankets she'd placed in his room without comment when winter had come early. I'm not asking you to manufacture evidence, Riddle said. His voice remained calm, but something in his posture had shifted. Simply to share what you observed. Surely that's not too much to ask in exchange for the protection and opportunity I'm offering. Travers was still writing, his parchment now half filled with cramped text, showing his value, proving his commitment. Unless, Riddle said softly, you feel your loyalty lies elsewhere, which is, of course, your choice, but it does help me understand where you stand. There it was. The choice had been offered politely, but it was still a choice. Write or walk away with nothing. No protection, no opportunity, no solution to the slow collapse of everything his family had been. Thorfinn picked up his quill. Adelaide Greengrass's face appeared in his mind. Her husband had met with auras. That much was true. Thorfinn had overheard a conversation about new regulations, something about monitoring dark artifacts. Names had been mentioned. He couldn't remember them all, but he remembered some. He began to write. The quill felt heavy in his hand, each word a small betrayal. But Riddle was right, wasn't he? This was just information, observations. If the Greengrasses had nothing to hide, this wouldn't harm them. And if they were working against pure-blood interests, then Thorfinn was simply being honest about what he'd seen. He wrote about Edmund's meetings, about the auras whose names he'd overheard, about the owls that had arrived at odd hours, and Adelaide's concern about someone named Moody, and a conversation he'd partially heard about a raid being planned. When he finished, his parchment contained perhaps 2/3 as much as Travers had written. He set down his quill. Riddle took both parchments, reading them without expression. The silence stretched. Thorfinn's heart beat against his ribs. Excellent, Riddle said finally. He looked at Travers. You've been very thorough, Mr. Travers. This is precisely the sort of detailed observation our organization requires. Travers beamed. Riddle turned to Thorfinn. And you, Mr. Roll. Concise, but informative. He set both parchments aside. Thank you both. I'll be in touch within a week regarding next steps. That's it? Travers asked, still smiling. Are we part of the organization now? You've demonstrated potential, Riddle said. But commitment is built over time. Consider this your first step. There will be others. They were being dismissed. Travers stood immediately, practically vibrating with satisfaction. Thorfinn rose more slowly. One more thing, Riddle said as they reached the door. He was looking at Thorfinn. The information you provided about the Greengrasses, you're certain of your observations? Yes, Thorfinn said. His throat felt dry. Good. Certainty matters. Riddle's expression remained pleasant. We'll speak again soon. Thorfinn walked home through Nocturne Alley's shadowed streets, Travers chattering beside him about what this meant, what opportunities might follow, how incredible it was to be noticed by someone like Tom Riddle. Thorfinn made appropriate sounds, but barely heard him. He'd done it. He'd taken the first step, provided information, demonstrated commitment, opened the door to the protection and purpose he desperately needed. He tried not to think about Adelaide Greengrass's kindness, tried to tell himself that information wasn't betrayal, that if she had nothing to hide, then his words couldn't hurt her. But his hands felt cold despite the summer warmth. 3 days later, the Daily Prophet reported a ministry raid on the Greengrass estate. Dark artifacts allegedly discovered. Edmund Greengrass arrested pending investigation. The article mentioned that information had been provided by concerned citizens about suspicious activities. Thorfinn read the article 3 times. His hands shook enough that the newspaper rustled audibly. He told himself he hadn't known this would happen. He'd simply shared observations. What the ministry did with information wasn't his responsibility, but he knew. In the part of himself that still recognized truth, he knew. That evening, an owl arrived. The message was brief. Saturday. Same location. Bring your wand arm. Thorfinn understood. The mark. The permanent commitment. He sat in his rented room, reading the message repeatedly. He could still refuse, could still walk away, write to Adelaide, try to explain, beg forgiveness. Could choose poverty and principle over protection and purpose. Through his window, he watched the street below. A group of young wizards passed, laughing together. They wore ministry robes, carried themselves with the easy confidence of people who belonged somewhere, who mattered to someone. Thorfinn wanted that, wanted to matter, wanted to be part of something greater than the slow decline of his family name. He burned the message, watching the parchment curl and blacken. Saturday came. He went. When Tom Riddle pressed his wand to Thorfinn's forearm and spoke the incantation, the pain was extraordinary. The skull and serpent burned themselves into his skin, permanent and undeniable. Evidence of his choice carried forever. "Welcome," Riddle said, "to the Death Eaters." Travers received his mark that same night. His family's name appeared in the next week's Prophet. Raided, investigated, father arrested. Travers had provided information about his own relatives. He'd proved his commitment thoroughly. Afterward, in the private room at Borgen and Burke's, Travers looked ill. I thought we were just sharing observations." "You were," Riddle said calmly. "And now you understand how information becomes action, how loyalty to our organization supersedes other considerations." He looked at both of them. "You've made your choice. There's no going back, only forward." Thorfinn touched his burning forearm. The mark throbbed beneath his sleeve. He'd made the practical choice, the smart choice, the only choice that offered him any future at all. He told himself that firmly, repeatedly, as though conviction could be achieved through repetition. But late that night, alone in his room, he remembered Adelaide Greengrass's face, her kindness, the blankets she'd brought without comment. He'd betrayed that kindness for a mark on his arm, and a promise of protection from a man whose eyes held no warmth at all. The organization he'd joined rewarded cruelty and called it commitment, turned loyalty into a weapon, made betrayal a requirement of belonging, and Thorfinn Roll, who had wanted so desperately to matter, had proved himself willing to pay that price. The mark burned. He did not sleep. Antonin Dolohov received the summons on a Tuesday morning, delivered by an owl whose eyes held too much intelligence to be natural. The message was brief, written in handwriting he recognized immediately. Malfoy Manor. Tonight. 8 o'clock. Come alone. No explanation, no context, just the command and the implicit understanding that refusal was not an option. Antonin burned the parchment and watched it curl into ash. 15 years as a Death Eater had taught him to recognize patterns, unexpected summons, private locations. The phrase, "come alone." These were not invitations to celebrate success. He checked his wand, his emergency portkey, the small vial of antidote he kept sewn into his collar. Then He apparated to the gates of Malfoy Manor precisely at 8. Lucius Malfoy himself answered the door, which was unusual. His expression was carefully neutral, but Antonin caught the tightness around his eyes. "He's in the study," Lucius said. "He's been expecting you." "Are you joining us?" "I've already had my conversation." Lucius's voice was flat. He stepped aside. "Good luck." The study was smaller than the drawing room, where meetings typically occurred. More intimate, more dangerous. The Dark Lord sat behind Malfoy's desk, a deliberate choice, Antonin thought, reminding Lucius that nothing here truly belonged to him. "Antonin," the Dark Lord gestured to a chair. "Sit. We need to discuss your future." Antonin sat. His mind catalogued exits, calculated odds, prepared defensive spells even as he kept his expression attentive and calm. "You've been with me for 15 years, the Dark Lord continued, "one of my earliest recruits. Your service has been exemplary. The intelligence network you and Rookwood built has proven invaluable to our cause." Relief and suspicion warred in Antonin's chest. Praise was rare. It usually preceded something unpleasant. "I've been reviewing our organizational structure," the Dark Lord said, "considering advancement opportunities, ensuring that my most capable followers receive appropriate recognition." He pulled out a folder, a muggle affectation that somehow made the moment more unsettling, and opened it. Inside were what appeared to be reports, each headed with a name. Antonin glimpsed his own name on the top page. "Your intelligence gathering in the last year has been exceptional," the Dark Lord said, reading from the report. "The information you provided about the Pre-Wed brothers' safe houses led directly to their elimination. Your surveillance of McKinnon family movements was thorough and actionable. The aura training schedules you obtained allowed us to strike when they were understaffed." He looked up. "Impressive work." "Thank you, my lord." The Dark Lord pulled out another report. "Rookwood's performance, by contrast, has been disappointing." He read in the same measured tone. The information he provided about Ministry Ward protocols was outdated. His surveillance of Dumbledore's movements yielded nothing actionable. The safe house locations he reported were abandoned by the time we acted. A pause. "Concerningly inadequate." Antonin kept his face neutral, but his stomach tightened. Augustus Rookwood had been his partner for over a decade. They'd built the intelligence network together, shared risks, covered each other's mistakes. The work the Dark Lord was praising as Antonin's often depended on groundwork Rookwood had laid months earlier. "Of course," the Dark Lord continued, "you've both operated as a unit, which raises questions about resource allocation, whether maintaining 2 senior operatives in intelligence represents the most efficient use of talent." There it was. The reason for the summons. "Rookwood's skills are considerable," Antonin said carefully. "His contacts within the ministry run deep. Much of what I've been able to accomplish builds on infrastructure he established. Loyalty to a colleague is admirable." The Dark Lord's tone suggested he found it anything but. However, sentiment cannot override operational effectiveness. The ministry is tightening security. Our window for intelligence gathering is narrowing. I need my best people in crucial positions, unencumbered by less capable partners. He closed Rookwood's report and set it aside with a finality that felt deliberate. "I'm restructuring the intelligence division," the Dark Lord said, "creating a clearer hierarchy. One person with ultimate authority over all information gathering and analysis. Someone I can hold accountable for results. He leaned forward slightly. I want that person to be you. The offer hung in the air between them. Antonin understood immediately what it meant. Rookwood had held equal authority in their partnership. This wasn't a promotion. It was a replacement, an elevation purchased by stepping on the person who'd stood beside him for 15 years. Rookwood would report to you, the Dark Lord continued. His ministry contacts would remain useful in a subordinate capacity, but strategic decisions, resource allocation, operational planning, that would be your domain, your responsibility, your recognition. And if I feel Rookwood's expertise warrants continued partnership? Antonin asked. The Dark Lord's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the room's temperature. Then I would question your judgment. A leader must be willing to make difficult decisions about personnel, to prioritize effectiveness over personal attachment. He paused. Unless you feel unable to shoulder that responsibility. The threat was delicate but unmistakable. Refuse the promotion and demonstrate weakness. Accept lesser authority. Admit that sentiment mattered more than success. May I ask, Antonin said, choosing words carefully, what prompted this evaluation? Has something specific occurred? Leadership requires constant assessment, the Dark Lord said. Rookwood's recent work has been consistently underwhelming. Your work has been consistently exceptional. The conclusion seems obvious. He tilted his head slightly. Or are you suggesting my assessment is incorrect? No, my lord. Then we're in agreement. Rookwood's performance has declined. Your performance merits greater authority. The Dark Lord pulled out a fresh piece of parchment. I'll announce the restructuring tomorrow. You'll assume full control of intelligence operations. Rookwood will assist as directed. This conversation is simply a courtesy, ensuring you understand your new responsibilities. Not an offer, then. A fait accompli. The choice wasn't whether to accept the promotion. It was whether to accept it gracefully or object and face the consequences. Antonin thought about Rookwood. They'd broken into the Department of Mysteries together, nearly died together when a curse went wrong, celebrated together when their intelligence had saved other Death Eaters from an aura ambush. Rookwood had covered for him twice when missions had gone poorly, had never asked for recognition or positioned himself above their partnership. But Antonin also thought about what refusal would mean. The Dark Lord didn't accept challenges to his judgment. Questioning this decision would mark Antonin as disloyal, sentimental, weak, all potentially fatal characteristics in the organization. I understand, my lord, Antonin said. I'm honored by your confidence. Excellent. The Dark Lord's smile was cold. You'll begin transitioning Rookwood's key contacts to your direct oversight. He'll retain his ministry position, of course. His access remains valuable. But all intelligence will flow through you for analysis and strategic application. When should I inform him? I've already done so. He's been notified of the restructuring. The Dark Lord stood, signaling the conversation's end. I'm sure he'll congratulate you appropriately. After all, you've earned this through superior performance. Antonin found Rookwood outside the manor gates, standing in the darkness beyond the wards. His partner, former partner, stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at nothing. Augustus. Rookwood turned. His expression was carefully blank, but Antonin knew him well enough to see the anger beneath. "Congratulations," Rookwood said. His voice was flat. "Quite a promotion. I didn't ask for this. Didn't refuse it either." Rookwood pulled out his cigarette case, a muggle habit he'd picked up during surveillance work, and lit one with the tip of his wand. 15 years. We built that network together. Every contact, every source, every piece of infrastructure. But apparently my contribution was disappointingly inadequate. That's not what I think. Doesn't matter what you think. Smoke curled between them. Matters what he thinks, and what you did when he offered you my position. He didn't offer, he informed me. There's a difference. Is there? Rookwood's laugh was bitter. You could have objected, could have insisted on maintaining the partnership, could have pointed out that most of your recent successes built on my groundwork. He took a long drag. But you didn't. You accepted. You chose the promotion over 15 years of partnership. Antonin wanted to argue, to explain that refusal would have marked them both as problems to be eliminated, that accepting was the practical choice, the survival choice, the only choice that kept them both alive and useful. But looking at Rookwood's face, he realized the explanation didn't matter. The partnership was already dead, killed not by the Dark Lord's restructuring, but by Antonin's acceptance of it. "I'm sorry," Antonin said quietly. "So am I." Rookwood dropped the cigarette and ground it under his heel. For thinking loyalty mattered, for believing we were building something together rather than competing for his favor. He looked directly at Antonin. For trusting you. He disapparated, leaving Antonin alone in the darkness. The announcement came the next morning, delivered at a gathering in Malfoy Manor's drawing room. 20 Death Eaters present. Enough witnesses to ensure the message spread to everyone who mattered. The Dark Lord explained the restructuring with the same calm efficiency he'd used in the private study. Intelligence operations required stronger leadership. Dolohov had demonstrated superior capability. Rookwood would continue serving in a support capacity, his ministry access remaining valuable under proper direction. No one questioned it. No one objected. They'd all learned that lesson early. After the announcement, several Death Eaters approached Antonin to offer congratulations. Their words were correct, but their eyes were calculating, measuring, understanding that the organization's rules had been reinforced. Perform or be replaced, betray or be betrayed, climb or be stepped on. Travers, who'd received his mark years after Antonin, clapped him on the shoulder. "Well deserved. You've always been sharper than Rookwood anyway." Antonin murmured something appropriate. He noticed Rookwood standing across the room, speaking with no one, watching everything. Their eyes met briefly. Rookwood looked away first. The restructuring took effect immediately. Rookwood's contacts were transferred to Antonin's oversight. His operational plans required Antonin's approval. His intelligence reports went through Antonin before reaching the Dark Lord. They maintained professional courtesy. Rookwood provided information when asked. Antonin made decisions and gave orders. Neither acknowledged what they'd lost, but the trust was gone. The easy collaboration that had made them effective together, the ability to anticipate each other, to cover gaps instinctively, to build on each other's insights, had dissolved the moment Antonin accepted the promotion. 3 weeks after the restructuring, Rookwood submitted a report about Department of Mysteries security protocols. Thorough, detailed, actionable. Exactly the sort of work the Dark Lord had claimed was inadequate. Antonin reviewed it, added his own analysis, presented it at the next meeting. The Dark Lord praised Antonin's intelligence gathering, mentioned nothing about Rookwood's contribution. Afterward, Rookwood approached him in the hallway. "That was my work. I credited you in the full report, but not in the presentation, not where it mattered." Rookwood's voice was quiet, dangerous. "You took my intelligence and presented it as yours, exactly what you claimed you wouldn't do. I presented it as our division's work, which it is. That's how the structure operates now. That's how you justify it to yourself." Rookwood stepped closer. "But we both know what you did. You stood in front of him and accepted praise for my work. Let him believe you were the sole source. Reinforced his decision to promote you over me." Antonin wanted to argue, to explain that this was how hierarchies functioned, that credit flowed upward, that he'd had no choice. But the words tasted like ash. "I did what was necessary," he said instead. "So did I once." Rookwood's smile was cold. Trusted a partner, believed in collaboration, built something together, thought loyalty mattered more than advancement. He turned to leave, then paused. "But I learned better. We all do, eventually. That's what this organization teaches us." 2 months after the promotion, Antonin sat in a small cafe in Muggle London, waiting for a new contact Rookwood had identified in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The contact never appeared. The next day, Rookwood reported that the contact had been reassigned unexpectedly, apologized for the wasted time. His tone was professionally appropriate. His eyes held nothing. Antonin realized with cold certainty that Rookwood had deliberately fed him bad information. Not enough to be obvious sabotage, just enough to waste his time, to make him look slightly less capable, to introduce doubt. He could report it, could claim Rookwood was undermining operations. But proving it would require admitting the contact had been Rookwood's discovery, which would raise questions about why Antonin hadn't properly vetted it himself. And even if he proved sabotage, the Dark Lord might simply eliminate Rookwood as a problem, which would make Antonin responsible for his former partner's death. So he said nothing, accepted the loss, made note of it. The next intelligence report Rookwood submitted, Antonin reviewed 3 times, checking every detail, trusting nothing. Finding it accurate made the situation worse somehow. Now he had to question everything, verify constantly, assume bad faith, even when none was present. Partnership had become opposition. Collaboration had become competition. The person he'd trusted most in the organization was now someone he had to guard against. And the worst part, the part that kept Antonin awake at night, was understanding that he'd done this. He'd chosen promotion over partnership, advancement over loyalty, his own security over 15 years of shared work and mutual trust. He'd made the practical choice, the survival choice, the smart choice, but sitting alone in his flat, reviewing intelligence he could no longer trust, watching his back against someone who'd once protected it, Antonin understood what he'd truly gained. Authority without support, advancement without trust, recognition purchased by destroying the only genuine partnership he'd known in this organization. The Dark Lord had offered him a promotion. What he'd actually given him was a lesson. Loyalty was weakness. Partnership was vulnerability. And the organization rewarded anyone willing to step on colleagues to rise. Antonin had learned the lesson well. He just hadn't realized how much it would cost. 6 months after the promotion, at another manor gathering, Antonin watched Yaxley receive praise for work that looked suspiciously similar to intelligence Antonin had developed. When he objected privately afterward, the Dark Lord's response was calm. Competition encourages excellence, Antonin. Surely you understand that. After all, your own advancement came from outperforming a colleague. The hypocrisy should have been stunning, but Antonin had been in the organization long enough to recognize the pattern. The Dark Lord deliberately created overlapping responsibilities, gave incomplete information to different operatives, encouraged rivalry and competition, ensured no one ever felt secure enough to trust anyone else. Because trust was dangerous. Partnership was dangerous. Any genuine collaboration between Death Eaters represented a potential threat to his absolute control. So he kept them competing, kept them suspicious, kept them isolated. And Antonin had bought into it completely, destroyed his own partnership, because he'd believed advancement was worth the price. That night, leaving the manor, he saw Rookwood in the courtyard speaking with Mulciber. They were laughing about something. Easy collaboration between operatives who hadn't yet learned to see each other as threats. Give them time, Antonin thought. Give them an opportunity for advancement at each other's expense. See which one chooses partnership and which one chooses survival. He knew which choice most made. He'd made it himself. His promotion felt heavier with each passing day, not like recognition, like a weight, like proof of exactly what he was willing to betray for the illusion of advancement in an organization built on sand. Rookwood was right. The organization taught lessons. Antonin had learned them perfectly. He just wished understanding the price had come before he'd paid it. Severus Snape stood outside the study where the Dark Lord waited, trying to control his breathing. His left forearm throbbed, the mark burning with summoning intensity that suggested impatience. He delayed as long as he dared, composing his thoughts, preparing his story, deciding what truths he could afford to share and which ones would kill him, or kill her. The door opened without his touching it. Inside, the Dark Lord sat in a high-backed chair, positioned to catch the firelight. Bellatrix Lestrange stood in the corner, watching Severus with undisguised contempt. Severus. The Dark Lord's voice was soft, almost gentle. You're late. My apologies, my lord. I came as quickly as I could without attracting attention. Of course. The Dark Lord gestured to a chair opposite him. Sit. Bella, you may remain. I value your perspective on matters of loyalty. Severus sat, acutely aware of Bellatrix's stare boring into his back. She never trusted him. The half-blood Slytherin who joined the Death Eaters through talent rather than lineage. Her suspicion had only intensified as he'd proven useful, gained access, received assignments usually reserved for purebloods. You requested this meeting, the Dark Lord said. Something about Dumbledore's movements? Not directly, my lord. Something more significant. Severus paused, letting anticipation build. This had to seem important enough to justify the urgency, valuable enough to secure his position, but incomplete enough to protect what mattered. I've come across information about a prophecy. The Dark Lord's expression didn't change, but the quality of his attention sharpened. Continue. One of my contacts at the Hogshead, a barman, discreet, useful for observing who meets with whom, overheard something unusual several weeks ago. Dumbledore meeting with Sybil Trelawney, the divination teacher. The Dark Lord's tone suggested what he thought of divination generally. Hardly remarkable. It wasn't a social call. She was interviewing for the Hogwarts position. During the interview, she apparently entered a trance state, made a pronouncement. Severus kept his voice level, factual. My contact only heard portions. The door was thick. Dumbledore used muffliato for most of the conversation, but what he did hear seemed significant enough to report. What did he hear? Bellatrix asked sharply. Severus turned slightly, acknowledging her without meeting her eyes. Fragments. Something about the Dark Lord specifically, about power and defeat, about a child. The silence stretched. Severus forced himself not to fill it, not to over-explain. Let them want more. Let them pull information from him rather than offering it too eagerly. A child, the Dark Lord repeated softly. Be specific, Severus. What exactly did your contact hear about a child? That one would be born with power to defeat you, my lord. Severus delivered the words carefully, watching for reaction. Born to those who have thrice defied you, born as the 7th month dies. The Dark Lord leaned forward. Those exact words. As my contact remembers them, my lord, he's reliable. I've used him before for information about order movements. He has no reason to fabricate. Born to those who have thrice defied me, the Dark Lord mused. The Longbottoms, the Potters, the Preweds, though they're dead now. He looked at Severus. And when is this child supposedly born? The end of July, my lord. This July, just weeks away. Bellatrix moved from her corner, circling closer. How convenient that you've only just heard of this. A prophecy made weeks ago, and you report it now? I heard of it 3 days ago, Severus said evenly. I needed to verify the information, ensure it wasn't order disinformation before bringing it to the Dark Lord's attention. Reporting unverified intelligence wastes time. Or you needed time to decide what to tell us and what to keep to yourself, Bellatrix said. Half-bloods are so good at divided loyalties. Enough, Bella. The Dark Lord's voice was quiet but absolute. She fell silent immediately, though her suspicion remained palpable. He turned back to Severus. You said your contact heard portions. Was there more to this prophecy? Here it was, the crucial moment. Severus knew there was more. He'd pieced together enough from his contact's description to understand that names had been mentioned, specific families identified. The Potters, Lily's family. He could tell the Dark Lord everything, secure his position completely by delivering the full prophecy, names and all, prove his loyalty beyond any question Bellatrix might raise, advance himself within the organization by providing actionable intelligence about a specific threat. Or he could withhold, keep the name secret, buy time to warn Lily, and gamble that partial information would satisfy the Dark Lord's immediate curiosity while giving Severus room to maneuver. The problem was that withholding was itself a choice. If discovered, it would prove exactly what Bellatrix suspected, that his loyalty was divided, that he placed personal attachments above the organization's interests, that he couldn't be trusted with sensitive information, and he would be discovered eventually. The Dark Lord was thorough. He would investigate, question others, possibly track down the barman himself. Any discrepancy between what Severus reported and what the Dark Lord independently learned would be evidence of betrayal. But if Severus told everything now, Lily's child, not born yet, not even certain to be the one the prophecy meant, would become a target immediately. The Dark Lord would act on complete information, would move against the Potters before Severus had any chance to intervene, to protect, to find another way. My contact believes there was more, Severus said carefully. Trelawney spoke longer than the fragments he could hear clearly. The door, the muffliato charm, the shock of hearing what he did hear. He can't be certain of everything said. What I've reported is what he's confident about. It was technically true, also technically incomplete. The best lies always were. The Dark Lord studied him. Severus maintained eye contact, kept his breathing steady, his occlumency shields solid. He learned long ago to school his thoughts in the Dark Lord's presence. Now the training was the only thing protecting the secret behind his words. Could your contact have heard names? The Dark Lord asked. Specific families? Possibly, my lord. He mentioned hearing Potter at one point, though he couldn't be certain in what context. Whether they were discussed as threats, as examples, or as Potter. The Dark Lord's eyes brightened with something dangerous. James Potter. Thrice defied me. Last month alone they escaped an ambush in Godric's Hollow, disrupted our recruitment in Wales, destroyed a safe house. His wife is pregnant. He looked at Severus. Did you know that? Severus's chest constricted. He forced his expression to remain neutral, academically interested. I'd heard rumors, my lord. I wasn't certain of their accuracy. Lily Evans, Bellatrix said, her tone sharp with realization. Your little mudblood friend from school, now Lily Potter, pregnant with a child due in July. The contempt in her voice, the slur delivered so casually, made Severus want to hex her. But he kept his hands still, his face composed. We attended Hogwarts together, Severus said flatly. I haven't had contact with her in years. But you knew she married Potter, Bellatrix pressed. You knew she was pregnant. Did you know about this prophecy and choose not to report it immediately? I reported it as soon as I verified the information, Severus said. 3 days is hardly a suspicious delay for proper intelligence gathering. Unless you were deciding whether to report it at all, Bellatrix said, or deciding what parts to share and what parts to conveniently forget. That's enough, Bella. The Dark Lord raised a hand. Your suspicion is noted, but Severus has brought me valuable intelligence, timely intelligence. Whether his methods are entirely pure is less important than whether his information is accurate. He stood, moving to the window. His silhouette against the darkening sky looked almost skeletal. A child born at July's end, to those who have thrice defied me, he said quietly. Born with power to defeat the Dark Lord. It's melodramatic, certainly. Prophecies often are. But I've learned not to dismiss them entirely. He turned back to Severus. You're certain this was a genuine trance, not theatre or deception? My contact is experienced enough to recognize the difference, my lord. He said. Her voice changed. Her manner changed. It was genuine. Then we must treat it seriously. The Dark Lord moved back to his chair. The Potters, the Longbottoms, both have children due in July. Both have defied me repeatedly. Both present, potential threats. What would you have me do, my lord? Severus asked. Continue gathering information. Confirm the due dates. Determine if your contact remembers anything else about the prophecy, any other details, any other names. The more specific our intelligence, the more precisely we can act. Of course, my lord. And Severus. The Dark Lord's voice hardened slightly. If you discover that you've withheld information, that your contact heard more than you've reported, that you've allowed personal sentiment to compromise your judgment, I will be profoundly disappointed. You understand the consequences of disappointing me. I understand, my lord. Good. You're dismissed. Report again in 1 week with whatever additional information you've gathered. Severus stood, bowed slightly, and turned toward the door. Bellatrix moved to intercept him. I'm watching you, she said quietly, for his ears only. I've always known you were false. Half-blood filth, playing at loyalty. One mistake, one sign that you're protecting your mudblood, and I'll prove it. Severus met her eyes. I look forward to disappointing you. He left before she could respond, before his mask could crack, before the fury and fear churning in his chest could show on his face. Outside, in the cold night air, Severus disapparated immediately. Not to his own flat. They might be watching. Not to any known location. Instead, he appeared in a Muggle neighborhood he'd scouted months ago as a potential emergency refuge. Anonymous. Forgettable. He leaned against a brick wall, hands shaking, breath coming fast. He'd done it. Reported the prophecy without revealing Lily's specific danger. Bought himself time to warn her, to find some way to protect her, to prevent the Dark Lord from targeting her child specifically. But he'd also committed himself to a path with no good ending. If he warned Lily now, she'd know he was still involved with Death Eaters. Would know he'd brought this danger to her. Attention. She'd cut him off completely, possibly report him to Dumbledore, certainly never trust him again. If he didn't warn her, she'd remain ignorant of the specific threat while the Dark Lord investigated and eventually identified her child as the prophecy's subject. And if he tried to play both sides, warn Lily while maintaining his cover with the Death Eaters, he'd likely be discovered by one side or both, trusted by neither, useful to none. He'd gambled that partial information would satisfy the Dark Lord. But the gamble had only created more danger. Now the Dark Lord knew about the prophecy, knew it concerned a child, knew the Potters were involved. Severus's withholding of details hadn't protected Lily. It had simply delayed the inevitable while ensuring she had no warning. The smart thing, the survival thing, would be to report everything. Go back tomorrow. Tell the Dark Lord he'd confirmed additional details, that his contact remembered the Potter name specifically, that Lily's child was the prophecy's clear subject. Prove his loyalty absolutely, secure his position, accept that some prices were too high to pay. But even thinking it made him feel sick. He'd joined the Death Eaters because they'd offered power, purpose, recognition for his talent rather than dismissal for his blood status, because they'd made him feel valued when everyone else, including Lily, had made him feel lesser. But standing here, knowing his information had put her child in danger, knowing his loyalty to the Dark Lord meant accepting her death or his own betrayal, Severus realized he'd been lying to himself for years. He hadn't joined for power or recognition. He'd joined because he'd been angry, bitter, desperate to matter to someone after losing the only person who'd ever made him feel like he belonged. And now his anger, his wounded pride, his desperate need to be important, had created a situation where the person he'd never stopped caring about was in mortal danger because of intelligence he'd provided. The organization he'd joined to feel valued had asked him to choose between his own survival and hers, and he didn't know if he could make that choice. 3 days later, Severus stood in the rain outside Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts. The gargoyle guardian eyed him suspiciously. "I need to speak with the headmaster," Severus said. "It's urgent. Password. I don't have one, but he needs to hear what I know. Tell him it's about a prophecy, about Lily Potter." The gargoyle didn't move. Severus stood there, soaking wet, acutely aware that coming here at all was a betrayal of the Dark Lord. That if anyone had followed him, if anyone reported this visit, his position among the Death Eaters would be destroyed. But he'd spent 3 days trying to find another solution. 3 days of sleepless nights, searching for some way to protect Lily without betraying either side, without having to choose. There was no other way. There had never been another way. The only choice was which loyalty to betray, his organization or his conscience, his survival or his soul. The gargoyle moved aside. The staircase appeared. Severus climbed it, each step feeling like a small death. At the top, Dumbledore's door stood open. The old wizard sat behind his desk, looking unsurprised. "Severus," Dumbledore said quietly, "come in. I think we have much to discuss." Severus entered. The door closed behind him with a soft, final sound. "I have information about a prophecy," Severus said. His voice was rough. "About the Dark Lord, about Lily Potter's child. He knows. He's going to act on it. And I can't." The words dried up. He stood there, soaking and shaking, facing the man who represented everything the Death Eaters opposed, about to betray everything he'd committed himself to for the past 6 years. "I need your help," Severus said finally. "I need you to protect her. Please." Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. Then he gestured to a chair. "Sit, Severus. Tell me everything, and then we'll discuss what comes next." Severus sat and began to talk. He told Dumbledore about the prophecy, about the Dark Lord's interest, about the specific danger to Lily's child. He told him about his own divided loyalties, his inability to serve both sides, his desperate need to save the one person who'd ever made him believe he was worth something. When he finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. "You understand," Dumbledore said finally, "that protecting Lily will require you to work against the Dark Lord, to spy for me, to risk your life repeatedly in service of people who will never know what you've sacrificed. I understand. And you understand that this choice, to come here tonight, to betray Voldemort's trust, means you can never truly return to the Death Eaters. Your loyalty will always be suspect. You'll be watched, questioned, never fully trusted by either side." "I understand." "Then why?" Dumbledore leaned forward. "Why risk everything for one person? Why choose her over your own safety?" Severus looked at his hands. They were still shaking. "Because I'm the reason she's in danger," he said quietly. "Because I reported the prophecy. Because I joined the Death Eaters, thinking power and recognition mattered more than..." He trailed off. "Because she deserves to live. And I don't deserve to keep serving him after putting her child at risk." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "Then we have an understanding. I'll do everything possible to protect Lily and her family. You'll continue serving Voldemort as my agent, providing intelligence, working to undermine his plans from within. He paused. This will not be easy, Severus. The path you're choosing leads to constant danger and no recognition. Can you accept that? If it keeps her safe, Severus said, I can accept anything. Very well. Dumbledore stood, offering his hand. Welcome, Severus Snape. To the right side. Severus shook his hand. The commitment settled over him like a weight. He'd made his choice, betrayed the Dark Lord, committed himself to serving Dumbledore, accepted that he'd never be trusted by either side, never be safe again, never be anything except a spy caught between opposing forces. But Lily would be protected. Her child would have a chance. And maybe, that was worth the price, even if Severus paid it for the rest of his life. Alden McNair stood in the drawing room at Malfoy Manor, watching the Dark Lord's resurrection with a mixture of awe and calculation. After 13 years of denying involvement, of maintaining his ministry position, of pretending the mark on his arm was a youthful mistake, the organization had returned, and with it, opportunity. The Dark Lord looked different, paler, more serpentine. Something fundamentally changed about his features, but his voice remained the same, soft, controlled, absolutely commanding. He stood before them, surveying the reassembled Death Eaters with eyes that missed nothing. 13 years, the Dark Lord said quietly. Some of you remained faithful during my absence. Others, his gaze swept across several faces, lingering on Lucius Malfoy, found it convenient to deny their service, to claim they were under Imperio, to purchase their freedom with gold and lies. Lucius's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. What could he say? Everyone in the room knew he'd talked his way out of Azkaban, while others rotted there for their loyalty. I do not forget either loyalty or betrayal, the Dark Lord continued. Both will be remembered as we rebuild, as we move forward, as we finish what we began. He gestured, and a house elf appeared with scrolls. You'll each receive assignments, proof of your continued value. Some tasks will be public, recruiting allies, gathering resources. Others will be more delicate. His smile was cold. I trust you'll all perform adequately. McNair accepted his scroll with steady hands. Around him, others opened theirs immediately, reactions carefully controlled. He waited until he was alone in a corner before breaking the seal. Giant negotiations. The colonies in Eastern Europe remain uncommitted. Convince them of our strength and their advantage in alliance. Coordination with Malfoy, who will provide financial resources and diplomatic contacts. Straightforward enough. McNair had worked with giants before. His position at the Beast Division gave him relevant expertise. The assignment played to his strengths. Then he noticed the second paragraph, written in smaller script. Malfoy's loyalty requires verification. His public denials, his distance during my absence. These things cannot be ignored. Your secondary objective is observation. Report his dedication, his commitment, his willingness to take necessary risks. I require honest assessment. McNair read it twice, understanding crystallizing. This wasn't just a mission. It was a test. For both of them. Malfoy would be evaluated on his performance. McNair would be evaluated on his honesty. And the Dark Lord had deliberately created a situation where their success required cooperation, but their advancement required betrayal. The giant negotiations began poorly. The colony's leader, a massive creature named Carcass, received them in a mountain stronghold that stank of unwashed bodies and rotting meat. McNair had dealt with worse, but Lucius's obvious discomfort was palpable. "We represent Lord Voldemort," McNair began, using the formal introduction they'd agreed upon. "He seeks alliance with the giant colonies, mutual benefit, mutual strength." Carcass grunted. Lord Voldemort heard that name, heard he was dead, heard he was destroyed by a baby. The giants around him laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Rumors of his death were exaggerated," Lucius said smoothly, stepping forward. He wore expensive robes, carried himself with aristocratic confidence. "The Dark Lord has returned, stronger than before. He offers alliance and recognition to those wise enough to join him early." "Recognition?" Carcass leaned forward. "What recognition? Wizards hunt us, restrict where we live, treat us like beasts. Your ministry sends people like him," he pointed at McNair, "to control us like animals." "The ministry is weak," McNair said. "The Dark Lord will change that. Under his rule, giants will have territory, autonomy, respect. But first, we need your strength, your warriors, your commitment." "Commitment," Carcass spat. "Why should we commit to a wizard who disappeared for 13 years, who might disappear again? Why should we trust?" Lucius opened his mouth, but hesitated. The question cut too close to his own behavior, his own disappearance from the Death Eater ranks, his own convenience-driven loyalties. McNair watched Lucius struggle for words, saw the uncertainty, the hesitation, the aristocrat's instinctive aversion to risk showing on his face. This was the moment, the opening. If McNair stepped in now, covered for Lucius's weakness, they might still salvage the negotiation, might build alliance through cooperation rather than individual brilliance. Or McNair could let Lucius fail, let his hesitation speak for itself, report accurately that Lucius had wavered at the crucial moment, that his commitment remained questionable, that perhaps his years of denial had softened him permanently. The Dark Lord wanted honest assessment, truth about Lucius's dedication and willingness to take risks. And the truth was that Lucius had hesitated, had shown weakness, had proven that 13 years of comfortable denial had cost him something essential. "The Dark Lord rewards loyalty," McNair said, not to Carcass, but to fill the silence Lucius had created. "He punishes betrayal, but he also recognizes strength wherever he finds it. Giant or wizard, blood status matters less than capability. Join us, and you'll be valued. Oppose us, and—" He let the threat hang unfinished. It was adequate, not brilliant, but adequate. Carcass remained suspicious, but agreed to consider the offer. The meeting ended without commitment, but without outright rejection. As they left the stronghold, Lucius's frustration was obvious. "I apologize," he said stiffly. "I should have responded more quickly to Carcass's question." "You hesitated," McNair said. "Why?" The question was, it was unexpectedly direct. I needed a moment to formulate the proper response. We're negotiating with giants, not hosting a ministry dinner party. They respect strength, not eloquence. McNair kept his tone professional, but the criticism was clear. Hesitation reads as weakness. "I understand." Lucius's voice was cold. "It won't happen again." But they both knew it might. 13 years of safety, of distance from the Dark Lord's demands, had changed something in Lucius, made him cautious where he'd once been bold, made him calculate risks where he'd once simply acted. McNair filed the observation away. honest assessment the Dark Lord had requested. Truth about Lucius's dedication and commitment. The truth was damning. The second meeting went worse. Carcass demanded proof of the Dark Lord's strength. Not promises, not gold, but demonstration. Something that showed wizarding support, that proved the organization was real and capable. Bring fire, Carcass said. Bring destruction. Show us you can strike the ministry, hurt those who hunt us. Then we talk about alliance. Lucius paled slightly. A direct attack on the ministry would be premature. We're still rebuilding, still gathering strength. Such action would draw attention. We're not ready to handle. Then you're not strong, Carcass said flatly. You're weak wizards, making weak promises. We could strike a smaller target, McNair suggested. Something that demonstrates capability without overextending. A Beast Division outpost, perhaps. Somewhere remote, limited aura, response, but visible enough to prove our commitment. Lucius turned to him sharply. That would require significant resources, planning, approval from the Dark Lord, who expects us to secure giant alliance, McNair interrupted, who expects us to do whatever's necessary to achieve our objective. The conflict was obvious. McNair was proposing something bold, something that risked exposure and conflict. Lucius wanted caution, wanted to minimize risk, wanted to achieve the mission without putting himself in danger. I'll need to consult with the Dark Lord before approving such action, Lucius said finally. Carcass laughed. Consult? Warriors don't consult. Warriors act. He stood, towering over them both. Come back when you're ready to prove strength. Until then, we have nothing to discuss. They were dismissed, escorted out of giant territory, with nothing but promises and excuses. That night, in their temporary camp, Lucius poured himself wine with hands that shook slightly. The situation is more complex than anticipated, he said. Giants require demonstration of strength we're not positioned to provide. We'll need to adjust strategy, perhaps offer different incentives, find alternative approaches. Or we could simply do what they asked, McNair said. Strike a target, prove capability, secure alliance. At significant risk, Lucius set down his glass. The Dark Lord values success, but he also values intelligence. Reckless action that exposes our operations serves no one. Neither does failure. McNair met his eyes. We were given an assignment. We're failing. The Dark Lord will want to know why. The Dark Lord will understand that circumstances required adaptation. The giants are unreasonable in their demands. That you're afraid. The words hung between them. 13 years away from active service, 13 years of safety and status. You've forgotten how to take risks. Lucius's expression turned cold. I've forgotten nothing. I simply recognize the difference between courage and stupidity, between calculated risk and reckless endangerment. The giants don't see that difference. They see hesitation, weakness. McNair leaned forward, and so do I. Your observation is noted. Lucius's voice was brittle. I'm sure you'll include it in your report. So he knew about the secondary assignment, the evaluation, the test of his loyalty. Of course he knew. Lucius was many things, but he wasn't stupid. I report what I observe, McNair said carefully. Truth serves the Dark Lord better than flattery. How noble. Lucius poured more wine. Tell me, McNair, does your honest assessment include the fact that you've been positioning yourself to look strong by making me look weak? That you've undermined rather than supported, that your truth serves your advancement as much as the Dark Lord's interests. The accusation stung because it was partially accurate. McNair had let Lucius fail rather than covering his hesitation, had emphasized rather than minimized his weakness, had prioritized honest reporting over mission success because the Dark Lord had asked for truth, because McNair's own advancement depended on providing accurate assessment, because after 13 years of maintaining his position through careful navigation, McNair needed to prove his value in the reorganized hierarchy. "I've done what was asked," McNair said. "If that threatens you, perhaps you should question your own performance rather than mine." Perhaps. Lucius's smile was bitter. Or perhaps we're both doing exactly what he designed us to do. Compete rather than cooperate. Undermine rather than support. Prioritize our own advancement over mission success. The observation landed like a blow. Because Lucius was right. The Dark Lord had given them overlapping assignments, ensured someone would fail, created situation where honest reporting meant betrayal. And McNair had played his part perfectly. 3 days later, McNair stood before the Dark Lord in a private meeting at Malfoy Manor. Lucius was not present. "Your report," the Dark Lord said simply. McNair delivered it. The giant negotiations, Carcass's demands, Lucius's hesitation. He reported factually, without obvious bias, letting the events speak for themselves. The Dark Lord listened without interruption. When McNair finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Lucius has grown cautious," the Dark Lord said finally. 13 years of safety, of public denial, of pretending he was never truly committed. It changes a person. He looked at McNair. "You, by contrast, maintained your position without such denials, continued your work, remained ready. I served as I was able, my lord. And now you serve by telling truth, even when that truth reflects poorly on a colleague." The Dark Lord's expression was unreadable. "Some would call that betrayal. What do you call it?" The question was a trap. "Call it loyalty." And he condemned Lucius. "Call it betrayal." And he condemned himself. "I call it honesty, my lord," McNair said carefully. "You asked for assessment. I provided what I observed." "Indeed." The Dark Lord stood, moving to the window. "Lucius will remain involved in giant negotiations. His resources and contacts remain valuable, but strategic decisions will now flow through you. He'll support your plans rather than the reverse." A demotion, not explicit, but unmistakable. Lucius's authority reduced, his judgment questioned, his status eroded, because McNair had reported honestly, had told truth, had prioritized accurate assessment over colleague loyalty. "You're dismissed," the Dark Lord said. "Continue the giant negotiations. I expect better results." McNair bowed and left. Outside the study, he nearly collided with Lucius, who'd apparently been waiting. "Congratulations," Lucius said coldly. "I'm sure your report was thorough." "It was honest." "Of course it was." Lucius's smile was sharp. "Just as I'm sure the reports others will write about you will be equally honest when your time comes." He swept past, leaving McNair standing alone in the hallway. The implication was clear. Everyone was being evaluated. Everyone was being watched. Today, McNair had risen by reporting on Lucius's weakness. Tomorrow, someone else would rise by reporting on McNair's. The organization rewarded betrayal, encouraged competition, ensured no one ever trusted anyone else. And McNair had just proven He understood that lesson perfectly. That night, alone in his quarters, McNair reviewed his choices. He'd been given an assignment and a test. He'd completed both successfully, secured his position, demonstrated his value, proven his willingness to prioritize the Dark Lord's interests over colleague loyalty. He'd done everything right. So why did it feel hollow? He thought about Lucius's hesitation. The man's obvious fear, his 13 years of comfortable distance from Death Eater operations, his struggle to reconcile safety with commitment. McNair had reported all of it, honestly, accurately, professionally. But he'd also let Lucius fail rather than helping him succeed, had emphasized weakness rather than covering it, had chosen his own advancement over mission effectiveness, because that's what the organization rewarded. Individual success purchased through colleague failure, honest reporting that served personal advancement while destroying trust. The Dark Lord had designed it that way, created overlapping assignments, ensured someone would always fail, made betrayal a requirement of advancement. And Death Eaters like McNair, ambitious, capable, desperate to matter, cooperated completely, competed rather than collaborated, prioritized personal status over organizational effectiveness. The giant negotiations would continue. McNair would lead them now, with Lucius relegated to support role. Maybe they'd succeed. Maybe McNair's willingness to take risks would secure alliance where Lucius's caution had failed. Or maybe they'd fail together, each blaming the other, each reporting the other's inadequacy, each trying to rise by pushing their colleague down. Either way, the trust required for genuine partnership was already destroyed. McNair had seen to that by reporting Lucius's weakness, and Lucius would surely retaliate by watching for McNair's mistakes, waiting for his moment to provide his own honest assessment. That's how the organization worked. That's what the Dark Lord had built. A hierarchy where advancement required betrayal, where loyalty to the organization meant disloyalty to everyone in it, where honest assessment was simultaneously rewarded and punished. McNair had risen today. Tomorrow, he'd be watching his back, because everyone else was watching it too, waiting for their chance to provide honest assessment of his failures. That was the price of advancement. That was the lesson the organization taught. And McNair had learned it perfectly. Alecto Caro stood outside the gates of Riddle Manor, her brother beside her, both silent in the November cold. The summons had come at midnight, immediate, non-negotiable, offering no explanation beyond the command to appear. But Alecto knew. She'd known the moment she'd discovered the empty dormitory, the blasted wall, the clear signs of student escape from the supposedly secure Ravenclaw Tower. 3 students gone, vanished into the night, despite the wards, despite the patrols, despite everything she and Amicus had implemented to control Hogwarts. Someone would be held accountable. "It wasn't my fault," Amicus muttered, his breath misted in the air. "The wards on that corridor, you were supposed to check them last week." "I did check them. They were intact." Alecto kept her voice low. "You were responsible for the patrol schedule. Who was supposed to be watching that section?" "Doesn't matter now." Amicus's jaw was tight. "What matters is what we tell him. We need the same story. United front." The gates swung open before Alecto could respond. They walked up the long drive in silence, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside, the drawing room held more Death Eaters than Alecto had expected. Not just them. Yaxley stood near the fireplace. The Lestrange brothers occupied chairs along the wall. Dolohov leaned against a bookshelf, watching everyone with predatory attention. An audience, witnesses. This wasn't going to be a private reprimand. This was going to be a demonstration. The Dark Lord sat at the room's head, Nagini coiled at his feet. His expression was calm, which was somehow worse than anger. Alecto, amicus. His voice was soft. Thank you for coming so promptly. Please, sit. 2 chairs had been positioned in the room's center, facing him, surrounded by the others, on display. Alecto sat, spine straight, hands folded. Beside her, amicus shifted uncomfortably. 3 students escaped from Hogwarts last night, the Dark Lord said. Luna Lovegood, Ernie Macmillan, and Terry Boot, all from Ravenclaw Tower, which is under your direct supervision. They breached wards, evaded patrols, and disappeared without triggering any alarms. He paused. I'm sure you can explain how this occurred. Alecto had prepared her explanation during the walk. Keep it factual. Acknowledge the failure, but emphasize the broader security challenges. Demonstrate competence in analysis, even if the outcome was poor. The breach occurred through a section of wall that had been recently repaired, she began. The students used a reductor curse, several of them, coordinated, to blast through before the wards could fully integrate. Our patrol schedule had a gap in that corridor during the shift change at... Who was responsible for ensuring wards integrated properly after repairs? The Dark Lord interrupted. That's a shared responsibility, my lord. Both of us oversee. Who specifically? His tone remained gentle. Surely you don't both inspect every ward. There must be division of labor. Here it was, the question designed to force blame onto one person. Amicus handles the lower floors and towers, Alecto said carefully. I handle the dungeons and main corridors. Ravenclaw Tower is technically his responsibility, but we both... So Amicus was responsible for the wards that failed. The Dark Lord turned his gaze to her brother. Is that accurate? Amicus's face had gone pale. The wards were checked. I had someone check them. They reported no weaknesses. You had someone check them. The Dark Lord's repetition made the words sound damning. You delegated, rather than personally ensuring the security of an area you knew was vulnerable. It wasn't just the wards, Amicus said quickly. The patrol schedule had a gap. 15 minutes where no one was watching that corridor. That's not my responsibility. Alecto manages the patrol rotations. Alecto's stomach dropped. He was deflecting, throwing her into the line of fire to save himself. Is that true, Alecto? The Dark Lord asked. Did the patrol schedule have a gap? She could lie, could claim the schedule was perfect, that Amicus was mistaken or deflecting, could try to protect herself by undermining her brother. Or she could tell the truth and accept the consequences. There was a gap, Alecto said. 15 minutes during the shift change. I'd identified it in last week's review and planned to adjust it, but I hadn't implemented the change yet. She met the Dark Lord's eyes. That was my error. The room was utterly silent, everyone watching, everyone calculating what this meant. So we have 2 failures, the Dark Lord said softly. Wards that weren't properly checked, and a patrol schedule with known gaps that wasn't corrected. He looked between them. A shared failure, then. Both of you contributed to this security breach. Yes, my lord, Alecto said. Amicus said nothing, jaw clenched tight. The question, the Dark Lord continued, is whether this represents genuine oversight or fundamental incompetence, whether you're capable of the responsibility I've given you, or whether perhaps Hogwarts requires different supervision. We're capable, my lord, Alecto said. The students who escaped were unusually determined, but we've already implemented. I'm not interested in what you've implemented after failure. The Dark Lord's voice hardened. I'm interested in understanding why you failed at all. Why my direct representatives at Hogwarts, my enforcement of discipline, my symbol of control, allowed 3 students to escape. He stood, circling around them slowly. Nagini uncoiled and followed, her scales whispering against the floor. Amicus, the Dark Lord said, stopping behind him. You were responsible for the wards. You delegated their inspection rather than checking personally. Why? I had other responsibilities that night, my lord. I was supervising detention, disciplining students who'd, so you prioritized punishment over security, chose the satisfaction of inflicting pain over the tedium of checking wards. The Dark Lord's tone was almost conversational. Understandable, but also the reason 3 prisoners escaped. Amicus started to respond, but the Dark Lord had already moved on, stopping behind Alecto's chair. And you, Alecto, you identified a gap in the patrol schedule, but didn't correct it. Why? I was planning to, my lord, but there were other priorities. Implementing new disciplinary protocols, investigating suspected resistance activity among the students. Excuses. The word was quiet but absolute. You identified a problem and chose not to fix it. That choice allowed escape. That choice represents failure. Alecto's hands tightened in her lap. Around the room, she could feel the other Death Eaters watching. Yaxley's slight smile, Dolohov's calculating expression. They were enjoying this, watching 2 of their colleagues be systematically dismantled, grateful it wasn't them. The Dark Lord returned to his seat. So we've established failure, shared failure, distributed responsibility, multiple errors compounding. The question now is consequence. What should happen to Death Eaters who fail in their assignments? No one answered. The silence stretched. In a properly run organization, the Dark Lord said, failure has costs. Incentives must be clear. Those who succeed are rewarded. Those who fail are, he paused, encouraged to improve. He looked at Amicus. You were responsible for the wards. Your delegation, your failure to personally ensure security. By rights, the primary consequence should be yours. Amicus's face went white. My lord, I. However, the Dark Lord continued, turning to Alecto. You identified the patrol gap and chose not to correct it. Your complacency, your prioritization, also worthy of consequence. He stood again, drawing his wand. The casual gesture made Alecto's heart race. The question is which of you bears greater responsibility? Who failed more completely? Who deserves? He smiled. Correction. This was it. The moment he'd been building toward. Not just punishment, but choice. Forcing one of them to accept blame, to absolve the other, to destroy their partnership through self-preservation. Amicus, the Dark Lord said. Was the ward failure more significant than the patrol gap? Amicus's eyes darted to Alecto, then away. The wards were certainly crucial, but without the patrol gap, even the weak wards might have been enough to. So you believe Alecto's failure was greater? I didn't say that, my lord. I simply answer the question. The Dark Lord's voice was still soft. whose failure was greater, whose consequence should be more severe. Amicus was silent. His hands gripped the chair arms. Alecto could see him calculating, weighing his own safety against hers, trying to find words that would spare him without explicitly condemning her. But the Dark Lord would accept nothing less than explicit condemnation. That was the point. That was always the point. Mine, Alecto said. Everyone turned to look at her. The Dark Lord's expression showed faint interest. My failure was greater, Alecto continued. Her voice was steady. Amicus delegated ward inspection, which was poor judgment but not malicious. I identified a security gap and chose not to fix it. That was active negligence. The responsibility is mine. Amicus stared at her. The Dark Lord studied her thoughtfully. An unexpected answer, the Dark Lord said. Your brother was prepared to defend himself at your expense, but you choose to accept full responsibility. He tilted his head. Why? Misguided loyalty? Feminine softness? Or do you genuinely believe your failure was greater? I believe accountability matters, my lord. The gap in the patrol schedule was my responsibility. I should have fixed it immediately. The students escaped because I didn't. Alecto met his eyes. That deserves consequence. Indeed it does. The Dark Lord raised his wand. Crucio. The pain was instant and absolute. Every nerve screaming, body convulsing, muscles tearing themselves apart. Alecto heard herself screaming but couldn't stop, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the agony burning through her. It lasted forever. It lasted seconds. When it ended, she was on the floor, gasping, her entire body trembling. Accountability, the Dark Lord said, from somewhere above her. As you said, consequence for failure. Through blurred vision, Alecto saw Amicus still in his chair, still sitting, still watching. His expression was complicated, relief that it wasn't him, shame that it was her, resentment that she'd taken his punishment. The Dark Lord turned to him. Your sister has accepted responsibility for your shared failure, spared you consequence through her own suffering. His voice hardened. I trust you appreciate her sacrifice. Yes, my lord, Amicus said, quietly. Good. Then you'll both return to Hogwarts and ensure this never happens again. No more delegation. No more identified but uncorrected gaps. No more failures. He looked down at Alecto, still trembling on the floor. Or next time, the consequence will be considerably more severe. Yes, my lord, Alecto managed. You're dismissed. Amicus helped her to her feet, roughly, without gentleness. They left the manor together, disapparating to the Hogwarts gate. Alecto's legs barely held her weight. Her entire body still shook with aftershocks. They walked toward the castle in silence. Halfway there, Amicus spoke. You didn't have to do that. Do what? Alecto's voice was hoarse from screaming. Take the blame. Accept the Cruciatus. He was going to punish me. You saw his face. You could have let it happen. You're my brother. So, Amicus's tone was sharp. That matters to you? After everything? After years of this? Alecto looked at him. His expression was hard, defensive, not grateful, not appreciative, angry. Why are you angry? She asked. Because you made me look weak. The words came out harsh. In front of everyone, Yaxley, Dolarhoff, all of them. They saw you protect me, saw me accept it, saw me sit there while my sister took my punishment. He stepped closer. Do you have any idea what that does to my standing, my reputation? Alecto stared at him. I protected you. You humiliated me. Amicus's jaw was tight, made me look like I needed protection, like I couldn't handle consequence myself, like I'm weak. You are weak, Alecto said. The words came out before she could stop them. You were going to blame me. I saw your face. You were calculating how to make it my fault, how to walk away clean while I took the Cruciatus. So you beat me to it. Amicus laughed bitterly, took responsibility first, made yourself look noble while making me look like a coward. That's brilliant, Alecto. Really brilliant. That's not. I wasn't trying to. Weren't you? He turned on her. Weren't you protecting your own reputation, making sure everyone saw you as the honorable one, the responsible one, while I'm the brother who let his sister take his punishment? Alecto felt something cold settle in her chest, because he wasn't entirely wrong. She'd taken responsibility partly to protect him, yes, but also partly because accepting punishment was better than being seen trying to avoid it, because the Dark Lord punished cowardice more than failure, because choosing to suffer was paradoxically safer than trying to escape suffering. She'd made a calculation, just like Amicus had been making a calculation before she'd spoken first. They both served an organization that forced those calculations. That made protection look like manipulation, sacrifice look like strategy, family bonds look like political maneuvering. I'm your brother, Amicus said quietly. But that doesn't mean anything here, does it? Not really. We're not family. We're competitors, colleagues at best. And today you outmaneuvered me. I took the Cruciatus for you. You took it to look good, to demonstrate strength, to prove you could accept consequence without flinching. He shook his head. And now everyone knows you're stronger than me, that you protected me, that I needed protection. He walked away, leaving Alecto standing alone in the darkness. She wanted to call after him, to explain that she genuinely had been trying to protect him, that family did still matter, that not everything was calculation and strategy. But standing there, body still trembling from torture, watching her brother walk away angry rather than grateful, she realized Amicus was right. The organization had destroyed even that, even family bonds, even the simple act of protecting someone you loved. Because in the Dark Lord's hierarchy, protection was weakness. Loyalty to anything except him was suspect. And any genuine care for another person was leverage to be exploited. She'd protected Amicus tonight, taken his punishment, proven her strength and her loyalty. And in doing so, she'd destroyed their relationship, made him resent her, turned family protection into competitive advantage. That was what the organization did, what it had always done. It took everything good, loyalty, courage, sacrifice, and twisted it into something poisonous. Alecto stood in the cold darkness, watching her brother disappear into Hogwarts, understanding finally what she'd joined. Not a cause, not a brotherhood, not anything worthy of sacrifice, just a machine that consumed loyalty and produced isolation, that rewarded betrayal and punished genuine care, that destroyed every human connection until all that remained was fear, competition, and the desperate struggle to survive by stepping on everyone else. She'd learned that lesson tonight, just like everyone else eventually did. The organization taught it perfectly, and now Alecto carried it with her, the knowledge that even protecting family was a strategic calculation, that even love was weakness, that even sacrifice was just another form of self-interest. She walked back to the castle alone. Her body still ached from the Cruciatus. Her heart ached from something worse, the realization that she'd given years to an organization that had systematically destroyed everything human in her, that had made protection look like manipulation, that had turned a sister's sacrifice into a brother's humiliation. The mark on her arm throbbed. She ignored it. What choice did she have? She'd made her commitment years ago. All that remained was living with the consequences. Bellatrix Lestrange stood in the shrieking shack, watching Severus Snape bleed out on the filthy floor, and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, though she'd suspected his treachery for years. Not vindication, though she'd warned the Dark Lord repeatedly. Not even pleasure at seeing a half-blood finally receive his deserved fate. Just nothing. The Dark Lord stood over Snape's body, Nagini coiling back to his side, blood dripping from her fangs. His voice was calm as he explained, to himself more than to her, why this had been necessary. The Elder Wand's allegiance. Snape's usefulness expired, the necessities of war. Bellatrix watched him speak, watched the casual dismissal of a wizard who'd served for 17 years, watched the complete absence of acknowledgement that she'd been right about Snape all along. "My lord," she said quietly. He turned to her, eyes cold and reptilian. Once, those eyes had made her heart race. Now they simply were, empty of everything except calculation and paranoia. "What is it, Bella?" "I told you." The words came out flatter than she'd intended. "About Snape. Years ago. I told you he couldn't be trusted, that his loyalty was divided, that Dumbledore had turned him. Did you?" The Dark Lord's tone was mildly interested, as though she were discussing weather rather than vindication. "I don't recall." "After Dumbledore died, I questioned why Snape had been given such a crucial task. You said," she stopped, remembering. "You said my jealousy was showing, that my devotion had made me suspicious of anyone who served you effectively." "Ah, yes." The Dark Lord looked back at Snape's body. "Well, you were correct, as it happens. He was false, Dumbledore's man all along." He stepped over the corpse casually. "We should return. The battle will begin soon." That was it. No acknowledgement of her insight. No admission that her suspicions had been valid. No recognition that 17 years of warnings had been accurate. Just casual agreement and immediate dismissal. Something inside Bellatrix, something that had been cracking for months, maybe years, finally broke. "My lord," she said again. He paused at the doorway. "What is it, Bella? We have limited time. I've served you since I was 20 years old, killed for you, tortured for you, spent 14 years in Azkaban rather than deny you." Her voice remained steady. "I've given you everything, and you've been rewarded accordingly. You stand in my inner circle. You carry my most trusted assignments. I was right about Snape." The interruption was dangerous, but Bellatrix pushed forward anyway. "For 17 years, I told you he was false, and for 17 years, you dismissed my concerns, called them jealousy, told me I didn't understand strategy as you did." The Dark Lord turned fully to face her. His expression was unreadable. "Are you seeking praise, Bella? Acknowledgement that your paranoid suspicions occasionally align with reality?" "I'm seeking—" She stopped. What was she seeking? Gratitude, recognition, some acknowledgement that her loyalty, her service, her 17 years of absolute devotion meant something beyond utility. I'm seeking, she started again, quieter, to understand why my loyalty matters less than his lies did. The silence stretched. Outside, distant sounds of battle were beginning, shouts, explosions, the chaos of war approaching Hogwarts. Your loyalty matters, the Dark Lord said finally. It has always mattered. But loyalty without effectiveness is sentiment, Bella. Snape was false, yes, but he was also useful. He provided information, access, strategic advantage. Your loyalty was pure, but what did it provide that his deception didn't? The words landed like physical blows. Bellatrix felt something in her chest constrict. I provided devotion, she said. Absolute commitment. Service without question or hesitation. Yes, the Dark Lord's tone was almost gentle. And that has been noted, appreciated, valued. He paused. But devotion is what I expect from all my followers. It's the baseline, not the achievement. Snape provided something beyond baseline service. His position, his access, his apparent trustworthiness to Dumbledore. These things had strategic value. So effectiveness matters more than truth. Useful lies matter more than faithful service. In war, the Dark Lord tilted his head. Yes, obviously. Surely you understand that. Bellatrix looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years, at the serpentine features that no longer held any humanity, at the cold calculation in eyes that had never, she realized now, actually seen her as a person, at the complete absence of anything resembling gratitude, appreciation, or genuine connection. She'd loved him, or thought she had given him everything, her freedom, her family, her sanity, her soul, had committed atrocities in his name, convinced that her devotion mattered, that her absolute loyalty made her special. But standing here, watching him dismiss 17 years of faithful service as baseline expectations, Bellatrix understood finally what she'd been too devoted to see before. She didn't matter, not as a person, not as an individual, not as Bellatrix Lestrange, who'd sacrificed everything. She mattered only as a tool, useful when effective, dismissed when convenient, valued only in comparison to other tools, other followers, other sources of strategic advantage. Her loyalty, the thing she'd built her entire identity around, was just expected, the baseline, nothing special, nothing that earned acknowledgement or gratitude or anything beyond being permitted to continue serving. You never cared, she said quietly. I beg your pardon. You never cared about me, about my service, about anything except what I could do for you. Bellatrix's hands were shaking. I believed that my devotion meant something, that absolute loyalty would matter. It does matter. The Dark Lord's patience was clearly wearing thin. Bella, your service has been exemplary, your loyalty beyond question. I have valued you as one of my most trusted. No, the word came out sharp. You've used me, valued my usefulness, but you've never actually cared whether I lived or died, succeeded or failed, suffered or survived. You've never asked about my 14 years in Azkaban, never acknowledged what that cost. Never, her voice broke slightly, never treated me as anything except a tool in your collection. The Dark Lord was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was very cold. What did you expect, Bella? Love, sentiment, personal connection. He stepped closer. I am the Dark Lord. I am building a new order for magical Britain. I don't have time or interest in emotional attachments. You chose to serve me. You chose absolute devotion. If you expected reciprocation, that was your error, not mine. I expected acknowledgement. Bellatrix's voice was barely a whisper. I expected that 17 years of perfect service would earn something beyond being told my devotion is merely baseline. Then you were naive. The Dark Lord turned back toward the door. We don't have time for this. The battle begins. I require your presence. You'll fight as you always have, with absolute commitment, without question, without hesitation. That's what you are. That's what you've chosen to be. He left. Bellatrix stood alone in the shack, Snape's body cooling at her feet, understanding finally settling over her like a shroud. She'd given everything to someone incapable of appreciation, had devoted herself absolutely to someone who viewed devotion as the minimum acceptable standard, had destroyed herself, her family, her freedom, her humanity, for a master who had never once seen her as anything except a useful instrument. And the worst part, the absolutely crushing part, was realizing she'd had signs all along. Years of signs, times when her service had been dismissed, her concerns ignored, her warnings unheeded. Moments when she'd felt invisible, despite standing right beside him. Instances when other Death Eaters had received praise for lesser service, while her absolute devotion earned nothing. She'd ignored all of it, told herself that he was focused on larger goals, that her devotion didn't require acknowledgement, that simply serving was its own reward. But it wasn't. It had never been. And standing here, finally seeing clearly, Bellatrix understood that she'd wasted 17 years pursuing recognition from someone fundamentally incapable of giving it. The battle had begun by the time Bellatrix reached Hogwarts. Curses lit the sky. Death Eaters and Defenders clashed across the grounds. The Dark Lord was somewhere ahead, pushing toward the castle, supremely confident in his inevitable victory. Bellatrix fought. She always fought, dueled with defenders, cast curses that killed and maimed, moved with the deadly efficiency of years of practice. Her body knew what to do even as her mind churned with new understanding. She killed Tonks, her own niece, though that had stopped mattering years ago when family became less important than loyalty. Felt nothing. Just tactical satisfaction at eliminating a skilled opponent. Later, she dueled Hermione Granger and the Weasley girl in the Great Hall, powerful, focused, absolutely committed to victory. Not because she believed in the Dark Lord's vision anymore, not because she cared about pure blood supremacy or magical dominance, just because this was what she did, what she'd always done, what she'd built herself into over 17 years of absolute service, a weapon, a tool, nothing more. Molly Weasley intervened. Bellatrix barely registered the mother's fury, the protective rage that powered her curse. She responded with technique rather than emotion, with trained efficiency rather than genuine commitment. It wasn't enough. The curse hit her square in the chest. Bellatrix felt herself falling, felt something vital stop inside her. The great hall spun. Voices echoed distantly. She was dying. On the floor, breath rattling, Bellatrix looked up through failing vision at the scene around her. Death Eaters fighting with desperate fury, defenders fighting with genuine purpose. The Dark Lord somewhere in the chaos, still convinced of his superiority, still expecting absolute victory, still completely incapable of caring about the followers dying in his name. Bellatrix had joined him at 20, given him her 20s, her 30s, 14 years of Azkaban horror, And these final months of hollow service, 37 years old now, half her life spent in devotion to someone who'd never once valued her beyond her utility. She'd thought her loyalty made her special, thought absolute devotion would earn recognition, appreciation, maybe even something resembling connection. But the Dark Lord didn't do connection, didn't do appreciation, didn't do anything except calculation and utility and cold assessment of strategic value. Snape's usefulness had expired, so he'd been killed. Bellatrix's usefulness was expiring now, so she would die. Another tool broken in service to goals that had never actually included her except as an instrument. Her vision was fading. The sounds of battle grew distant. Bellatrix felt her consciousness slipping away, felt death approaching with surprising gentleness. Her last thought, before darkness took her, was a simple one. He never even knew my name mattered. She'd been Bella to him. Bellatrix occasionally. Most often just you or implied presence. An instrument summoned when needed, dismissed when not. Never a person with hopes, fears, desires beyond service. Never an individual whose 17 years of sacrifice deserved acknowledgement beyond being told it was merely baseline. She'd given everything to a void that accepted offerings without gratitude and demanded more without recognition. And now she was dying on a cold stone floor, surrounded by chaos, utterly alone despite 17 years of absolute devotion. That was what the Dark Lord had given her. That was what absolute loyalty had earned. Nothing. The darkness was complete now. Bellatrix Lestrange, devoted follower, absolute loyalist, the Dark Lord's most faithful servant, died without him noticing, without him caring, without her service mattering beyond the tactical advantage it had occasionally provided. She'd learned the lesson, just too late to do anything with it. The organization demanded everything and gave nothing. Absolute devotion earned only the expectation of more devotion. Perfect service earned only the burden of continued service. And loyalty, genuine, absolute, soul-destroying loyalty, was valued only as long as it remained useful. After that, nothing. Just cold stone and gathering darkness, and the absolute certainty that 17 years of sacrifice had been given to someone incapable of appreciation, recognition, or even basic acknowledgement that her devotion had been anything beyond expected baseline service. Bellatrix's eyes closed. Her last breath rattled out. The battle continued around her without pause. The Dark Lord never looked back. Hours later, when the battle ended and the Dark Lord had fallen, someone found Bellatrix's body among the casualties. Just another Death Eater, killed in service to a failed cause. Just another casualty of a war that had consumed so many. No one spoke of her devotion. No one acknowledged her 17 years of absolute loyalty. No one recognized that she'd given everything to someone incapable of caring. She was just another body, another death, another tool that had broken in service and been discarded. That was her legacy. That was what absolute devotion had earned. The Dark Lord had taught her many things over 17 years. How to kill efficiently, how to torture effectively, how to subordinate every personal consideration to organizational demands. But the final lesson, the one she'd learned too late, was the most important. Devotion to someone incapable of appreciation was simply slow suicide. Absolute loyalty to someone who viewed it as baseline expectation was self-destruction dressed as service. And giving everything to a master who could never reciprocate was just elaborate self-erasure. Bellatrix Lestrange had learned that lesson perfectly. She just hadn't lived long enough to do anything with it. The organization had consumed her completely, just as it had been designed to do. Corbin Yaxley sat in a ministry holding cell, watching dust motes drift through the narrow beam of sunlight from the high window. 3 days since the Battle of Hogwarts. 3 days since the Dark Lord had fallen, and the organization had collapsed like a house built on sand. The cell was clean, surprisingly so. The ministry was processing captured Death Eaters with bureaucratic efficiency rather than vengeful chaos. Regular meals, access to sanitation, even a cot with blankets. Nothing like Azkaban would be, but considerably better than Yaxley had expected. Through the small window in his cell door, he could see other prisoners being led past. Travers yesterday, looking diminished without his wand. Selwyn this morning, moving like a much older man. The Carrows, Alecto limping, Amicus refusing to meet anyone's eyes. None of them spoke to each other. None acknowledged shared service or years of working together. They moved past like strangers, each isolated in their own collapse. The organization was gone, and without it, they were nothing to each other. A key turned in the lock. The door opened. Kingsley Shacklebolt stood there, new Minister of Magic, former Order member, the man who'd been hunting them for years. "Mr. Yaxley," Shacklebolt said, "we need to talk." The interrogation room was small but not deliberately intimidating. A table, 2 chairs, a pensieve in the corner, for memory verification, Yaxley assumed. Shacklebolt sat across from him, relaxed but attentive. "You're not being offered a deal," Shacklebolt said immediately. "I want that clear from the start. What we discuss today won't reduce your sentence or guarantee anything about your future. This is information gathering, testimony for the historical record, understanding how Voldemort's organization functioned." Yaxley said nothing. The absence of a deal was almost refreshing in its honesty. "You served for 15 years, Shacklebolt continued, rose to the inner circle, participated in significant operations. You saw how the organization worked from the inside." He leaned forward slightly. "I want to understand what you saw, not because it will help you, but because it might help us prevent the next dark wizard from building something similar." "Why would I help you understand that?" "Because you're sitting in a cell, facing a lifetime in Azkaban, and the organization you sacrificed everything for collapsed the moment its leader died, because maybe you have questions about what you gave 15 years to." Shacklebolt's voice was calm. "Or maybe you don't. Maybe you're still convinced it was all worth it. Either way, I'm interested in the truth." Yaxley looked at him, searched for the trap, the manipulation, the angle, found only genuine curiosity. "What do you want to know?" "Start with a simple question." Shacklebolt pulled out parchment and a self-inking quill. "In 15 years of service, did the Dark Lord ever ask your opinion? Did he ever care whether you survived a mission? Did he ever demonstrate that you mattered to him as a person rather than as a tool?" The question hit harder than Yaxley expected, because the answer was simple. "No. Never. Never." Yaxley's voice was flat. "He gave orders. We followed them. Success was expected. Failure was punished. But he never asked what we thought, never consulted us about strategy beyond receiving intelligence reports, never expressed concern about casualties except as they affected operational capability. You served him for 15 years. And he never once treated you as a valued colleague. He treated us as instruments. The words were coming easier now. Useful when effective, discarded when not. Bellatrix was his most devoted follower, gave him everything, and he valued her exactly as much as any other Death Eater, which is to say, not at all. Shacklebolt was quiet for a moment, writing. Then, yet you all stayed, continued serving. Why? Fear, mostly. Yaxley rubbed his eyes. The mark ensured we couldn't leave. The organization punished attempted defection more harshly than failure. And after a certain point, after we'd committed enough atrocities, compromised ourselves thoroughly enough, there was nowhere else to go. We'd burned every other bridge. Tell me about the internal dynamics, how Death Eaters treated each other. We didn't, not really. Yaxley leaned back. We competed, undermined each other, reported each other's failures. The Dark Lord deliberately structured things so we'd never trust each other. Overlapping assignments, incomplete information, promotion through demonstrating colleague inadequacy. He laughed bitterly. It was brilliant, actually. Ensured no one could ever organize against him because we were too busy fighting each other. Can you give me specific examples? Yaxley thought about Dolarhoff and Rookwood, about McNair's reports on Malfoy, about Alecto taking punishment for Amicus, and the resentment that had followed, about every instance where advancement required betrayal, where loyalty to the organization meant disloyalty to everyone in it. He talked. For over an hour, he talked. Shacklebolt listened, asked clarifying questions, took meticulous notes, never judged, never editorialized, just gathered information with professional thoroughness. One more question, Shacklebolt said finally. Looking back now, knowing how it ended, was there ever a genuine sense of brotherhood, camaraderie, any feeling that you were building something together? Yaxley started to answer, then stopped, thought about it honestly. No, he said quietly. There wasn't. We called it brotherhood, used the language of shared purpose, but we never trusted each other, never genuinely supported each other. Every interaction was transactional, competitive, shot through with calculation about individual advantage. He met Shacklebolt's eyes. We were colleagues united only by fear of a master who viewed us all as disposable. That's not brotherhood. That's just collective imprisonment. Thank you. Shacklebolt stood. That's helpful testimony, honest testimony. What happens now? You go back to your cell. Eventually, you'll be tried, sentenced, probably to significant time in Azkaban, given your involvement. Shacklebolt paused at the door. But for what it's worth, and it's not worth much, I know, your willingness to speak honestly today will be noted. Won't change your sentence, but it will be noted. He left. Yaxley sat alone in the interrogation room, feeling oddly lighter. He'd expected that talking would feel like betrayal. Instead, it felt like finally acknowledging truths he'd been avoiding for 15 years. The organization had been hollow, built on fear rather than shared purpose, maintained through competition rather than cooperation, sustained only by the Dark Lord's overwhelming power and the followers' inability to escape. And now, that power was gone. The organization had evaporated instantly. No succession plan, no continued resistance, just immediate total collapse the moment the center was removed, because there had never been anything real holding it together. Over the following weeks, Yaxley watched other Death Eaters processed through the system. Some refused to speak, maintaining defiant silence. Others talked, like him, not for deals, but simply to acknowledge truth. Rookwood testified about the intelligence network's dysfunction, about competing with Dolohov, about mistrust that had undermined operational effectiveness. He spoke clinically, analytically, a spy assessing an organization's structural failures. McNair described the giant negotiations, how deliberate sabotage of colleague success had been not only tolerated but encouraged, how the Dark Lord had designed failure into the assignment structure. Travers, older now, worn by years of service, talked about his recruitment, about betraying his own family to prove loyalty, about realizing too late that the organization demanded everything and gave nothing. None of them spoke to each other. Even in adjacent cells, sharing the same fate, they maintained the isolation the organization had taught them. Trust remained impossible. Camaraderie remained absent. They were together only in the most technical sense. The organization had destroyed their ability to connect even with each other. 6 weeks after his arrest, Yaxley received an unexpected visitor, Kingsley Shacklebolt again, but this time with a different purpose. "I want to show you something," Shacklebolt said. "It's not required. You can refuse. But I think you should see it." He led Yaxley, under guard, but without chains, to a ministry courtyard where a memorial was being constructed, names carved in black stone, photographs mounted on frames, flowers left by mourners. "The Order's Memorial," Shacklebolt explained, "for those who died fighting Voldemort. We're dedicating it next week." Yaxley looked at the names. Some he recognized, opponents killed in battle. Others were unfamiliar. The photographs showed smiling faces, people captured in moments of genuine joy. "Why show me this?" "Because I want you to see the difference." Shacklebolt gestured to the memorial. These people chose to fight together, not because they were marked and couldn't leave, not because they feared punishment for defection, but because they believed in something and trusted each other enough to risk everything for it. He pointed to a photograph of the Weasley family, grief-stricken around a younger man's image. They lost Fred. The pain nearly destroyed them, but they stayed together, supported each other, continued fighting not because they had no choice, but because they chose each other. Yaxley looked at the memorial, at the evidence of genuine connection, actual trust, real brotherhood, everything the Death Eaters had claimed to have but never actually possessed. "We lost people too," Yaxley said quietly. "Did you mourn them?" Shacklebolt's question was gentle. "When Bellatrix died, did anyone grieve? When Dolohov was captured, did anyone try to rescue him? When Death Eaters fell in battle, did the survivors feel genuine loss or just tactical inconvenience?" Yaxley said nothing, because the answer was obvious. Death Eaters didn't mourn each other, didn't rescue each other, didn't genuinely care whether colleagues lived or died beyond how it affected organizational capability. "That's the difference," Shacklebolt said. "That's what you never had. Connection, trust, the willingness to fight for each other rather than just alongside each other." He turned to face Yaxley directly. "The Dark Lord built an organization on fear and competition. It made you all effective for a while, but it was built on sand, and the moment he fell, you all scattered like strangers. Because you were strangers, you always had been." The trial came 2 months after his arrest. Yaxley was sentenced to 20 years in Azkaban. Harsh, but not life. His testimony had been noted, as Shacklebolt had promised. It didn't excuse his crimes, but it had mattered slightly. As auras led him from the courtroom, Yaxley passed Thorfinn Roll, being brought in for his own trial. Their eyes met briefly. Roll looked away first, as though acknowledgement of shared history was too dangerous even now. In the holding area before transport to Azkaban, Yaxley found himself in a common room with other convicted Death Eaters awaiting transfer. Dolohov sat in one corner. The Carrows occupied separate areas. Selwyn stared at nothing. Travers looked decades older than his years. No one spoke. No one acknowledged shared service or years of working together. They sat in isolation, prisoners united only by shared destination and mutual mistrust. This was the organization's final legacy. Even after collapse, even facing shared punishment, they couldn't connect, couldn't trust, couldn't form any genuine bond. The Dark Lord had built that into them too completely, had taught them that trust was weakness, that connection was vulnerability, that everyone was a competitor first and a colleague never. And now they sat together, alone, destroyed by the same master, punished for the same service, but incapable of finding any solidarity in shared fate. Yaxley looked around the room, saw the isolation on every face, the careful distance everyone maintained, the absolute absence of anything resembling brotherhood. This was what they'd sacrificed everything for. This was what 15 years of service had earned, not power or purpose or genuine connection, just fear, isolation, and the slow realization that they'd given everything to an organization built on sand. The Dark Lord had promised them greatness, strength, recognition, a new order where they would matter. Instead, he'd given them competition, paranoia, and the systematic destruction of every human connection that might have sustained them when the organization collapsed. And it had collapsed instantly, completely, the moment its center was removed, because there had never been anything real holding it together. No shared values, no genuine loyalty, no mutual trust or care, just fear, just calculation, just the cold reality that they'd all been instruments in one man's pursuit of power, valued only for their utility and discarded the moment they stopped being useful. The transport to Azkaban departed at sunset. 20 Death Eaters chained together, guarded by auras, moving toward years of imprisonment. They traveled in silence, no conversations, no shared reflection, no acknowledgement of common fate. Even now, even after everything, the organization's lessons held: trust no one, maintain isolation, see everyone as a potential threat. Through the transport's small window, Yaxley caught a glimpse of the Order's memorial as they passed. Even from a distance, he could see people gathered there, mourning together, supporting each other, connected by something that had survived their leader's death and continued binding them together. Everything the Death Eaters had claimed to be, but never actually were. Yaxley closed his eyes. 20 years in Azkaban stretched ahead of him. 20 years to reflect on 15 years of service, to understand what he'd given and what he'd received. The organization was destroyed. The Dark Lord was dead. The Death Eaters were scattered, imprisoned, isolated from each other, even in shared punishment. And sitting in chains, heading toward decades of imprisonment, Corbin Yaxley finally understood the truth. They'd never been building anything. They'd been destroying themselves, systematically, deliberately, under the direction of a master who'd understood that isolated followers were controllable followers, that fearful servants were obedient servants, that broken people were useful people. The Dark Lord had built his organization on the deliberate destruction of everything human in his followers, and they'd cooperated, had competed for his favor by betraying each other, had proven their loyalty by destroying trust, had demonstrated their commitment by accepting isolation. And now they sat in ruins. The organization gone, the master dead. Nothing remaining except the damage they'd done to themselves and each other in service to someone incapable of appreciation, gratitude, or even basic acknowledgement that their sacrifice had been anything beyond expected. That was the final lesson. That was what the organization had taught them all. Loyalty without reciprocation was suicide. Devotion to someone incapable of care was self-destruction. And giving everything to a master who viewed it as baseline, expectation was just elaborate erasure of everything that made them human. Yaxley had learned it perfectly, just far, far too late to matter. The transport continued into darkness. The Death Eaters sat in silence, alone together, destroyed by what they'd served, exactly as designed. Epilogue. 3 years later, a small gathering occurred at the Order's memorial. Not a formal ceremony, just people who'd chosen to fight together, meeting to remember those they'd lost and celebrate those who'd survived. The Weasleys came, Harry Potter and Hermione Granger, former Order members and their families, people who'd risked everything for each other and continued choosing each other even after the war ended and the shared enemy fell. They talked, laughed, remembered, mourned, connected, not because they had to, not because fear compelled them, not because anyone was forcing them together, but because they'd built something real, something that survived victory and defeat, loss and celebration, time and change, something the Death Eaters had never had and never could have had under a master who'd systematically destroyed every foundation on which genuine connection could be built. In Azkaban, in separate cells, the surviving Death Eaters sat alone. 17 years remained on Yaxley's sentence. Others faced more or less, but all faced it in isolation, mistrusting even each other, incapable of the connections that might have made their punishment bearable. That was the final contrast. That was the final lesson. One group had built something that survived and sustained them. The other had destroyed themselves in service to someone who'd valued them only as instruments. One group had chosen each other freely. The other had been bound by fear and competition. One group mourned their losses together. The other couldn't even acknowledge shared fate. The Dark Lord had promised them everything. He'd given them nothing except the systematic destruction of everything that made life worth living. And now they understood. Far too late, but perfectly. The organization had taught them well.